Okay, so Wario has been around for over 30 years now. And the very first game he appeared in was the Super Mario Land 2 Golden Coins game for Game Boy back in the early 90s. And since then, he's been seen as one of the most popular Nintendo characters of all time. And the thing is, there are people who probably wouldn't put him above the likes of Link and Donkey Kong and Samus and what have you, but I do feel that Wario is really the first true anti-hero character that Nintendo ever created, and he played a good villain in Super Mario Land 2 back in the early 90s. And for whatever reason, Nintendo decided not to, I don't know, to make him a villain longer than he was, because he actually played a good villain, and for the most part, I do feel that it was something different that we got from the usual formula of Bowser being the main villain, kidnapping the princess, Mario having to save her. And granted, that formula has worked over the past couple of decades. I do feel that, it's a bit redundant, and if Nintendo could, make it work by just changing small things and making millions off of it, then they should continue to do so. But Wario, on the other hand, I mean, he got his own video game series after Super Mario Land 2, and then we had gotten like Super Mario Land 3 shortly after that. That game was actually pretty successful. The only thing was that it was on Game Boy, and if it was on the SNES, it probably could have been more popular than it was. And the thing is, Wario has had his own series, which started out on Game Boy, and then around like the early 2000s, Nintendo started putting out Wario games for actual home consoles like GameCube and Wii and all that. And honestly, like the 2000s was an underrated time period for Wario, because during that time period, that's when Wario probably had some of his best games. You had I believe you had WarioWare Smooth Moves, which came out back in '06, and you had I believe there was another Wario game that came out back in the early 2000s. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was also it was actually a huge hit as well. But the only problem was the 2000s was pretty much dominated by, I guess, Pokemon and by Mario as it related to anything gaming related. And on top of that, you had the PlayStation 2, becoming very popular. The release of the very first Xbox console, which, overshadowed a lot of stuff that Nintendo did that wasn't Pokemon or Super Mario related. And I do feel that, I guess, Nintendo not having a Wario game for the SNES or the N64 definitely hurt Wario's popularity in the long run, because the SNES and the N64 were two of Nintendo's most popular consoles ever. In fact, the SNES and the N64 are arguably two of the most iconic Nintendo-based consoles of all time. And I do feel that, I don't know, it got to a point where when they finally decided to put Wario on a home console, it felt like it was too late, because the GameCube console from the early 2000s, not to take anything away from it, it's a great game system, highly underrated, but the thing is, it didn't sell too well commercially. In fact, it was considered a flop, you know what I mean? And because of that, I do feel that that definitely hurt Wario a lot, and I do feel like, other than making, Wario a bounty hunter or whatever, it's like they kind of dropped the ball with him in terms of character development, because basically Wario was designed to be some goof who was supposed to imitate Mario but be cooler and fatter and I guess edgier and tougher and what have you. And I do feel like Wario was a nice alternative for those who kind of soured to Mario after a while, but at the same time, Luigi's more popular than Wario, mainly because he's been around longer than Wario. Luigi's been around since the 80s. The very first Mario game came out, and you had the trilogy on the NES, you know what I mean? But I do feel that Wario could have shined more in that villain role in Super Mario Land 2, and if they had continued the series onwards, I feel like Wario could have been a bigger name than he ended up becoming. And honestly, I'm shocked that we never got a Super Mario Land 4, because that was because that's the game that people had been wanting to see since I guess, the late 90s, because Super Mario Land 3, I believe, was the very first game that Wario had where he was the main character. And for whatever reason, there was never a 4. And a lot of people would go on record and say that Super Mario Land 3 wasn't even like a Super Mario Land 3. It wasn't even an official sequel to Super Mario Land 2, because even though the events from Super Mario Land 3 follow the events of Super Mario Land 2, Mario is not really in Super Mario Land 3. And instead, they just made Wario the main, I guess, protagonist for no rhyme or reason. But hey, it is what it is. And yeah, I do feel like in general, Wario should probably be a bigger name than he is, but I don't think he'd be a bigger name than Mario. Even if Nintendo had decided to, I guess, give him his own game on the SNES or the N64, I still feel like he would not be as big of a name as Mario. Should he be a bigger name in gaming in general? He should be, but the thing is, the landscape of gaming changed a lot during the 2000s and the teens decade, and people have different preferences. They prefer RPGs, action adventures, shooting games, battle arena type games, battle royale type games. Times change, people change, technology change, and unfortunately, those changes ended up affecting Wario's popularity in a negative way, but it's not all bad, because the latest game that he had that came out not too long ago, which was the WarioWare Get It Together game from 2021, actually did pretty well in terms of sales. It sold more than people expected, and visually, it may not be the best game that you've seen, but at the same time, it was entertaining enough to turn heads, and it made people want to buy it. So there's definitely something there with Wario, but I don't think I ever see him possibly surpassing the likes of Mario or Luigi or Donkey Kong or whoever in popularity.